Okay, hello everybody. I'm here this morning with Zach Goodrich from TIFF Nature Preserve. Hey Zach, thanks for joining us and taking the time to talk with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. No problem.
So if we could just start out, could you tell us a bit about yourself and what it is that you do at TIFF?
Sure. So I am the preserve steward at TIFT. So essentially, I'm responsible for all the land conservation work and land stewardship work that happens at TIFT. So that's everything from managing the preserve from kind of like the property management standpoint, like posting our boundaries, dealing with trespassing issues, illegal activity, that kind of thing, to the recreational side of it, so taking care of the trails. And managing that associated infrastructure, all the signage and the benches and all that kind of stuff, and then the ecological side of it as well, which is obviously the most fun part of the job. So at TIFT is covered in head to toe in invasive plant species, which really degrade the habitat quality. So I'm working on managing that essentially and trying to reestablish native plant communities. So at TIFT, I'm the only full-time conservation person there. We have two environmental educators and a director, and they're mainly focused on education and public programming and that type of thing, and running the visitor center. And I'm kind of the person that's outside doing the physical work and also kind of planning and coordinating that physical work as well.
Awesome. Sounds like a lot. So if there is such a thing, can you tell us what kind of a typical day is like in your job?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I would say in this job, more so than like any job I can think of, there is not a typical day. And a lot of it is seasonal. So depending, we really work with the seasons because a lot of what I do in terms of ecological management is vegetation management, and that is a very seasonal thing. And then also kind of the usage of the preserve is seasonal. But, the job involves, anywhere from a full day in the office doing record keeping or responding to emails or research requests, or just writing grants, applying for grant funding, managing that grant funding, that kind of thing, to being outside, emptying the trash cans, cutting back the trails, doing invasive species treatment. So we use herbicide. We also do, physical or mechanical cutting of the invasive species, to doing monitoring. So we participate in things like the Great Lakes Marsh Monitoring Program, which monitors marsh habitat through bird surveys and amphibian surveys. We also started up an annual vegetation monitoring survey that monitors change in the vegetation communities at TIFT. So we have 20 transects, and we do that every year. To going around and enforcing the rules, so telling people they can't fish at Beth Pond, talking to people that are bringing their dogs because they're not allowed, and that kind of thing. So you come up with a plan for the day to do one or more of the things, and sometimes you get totally derailed dealing with issues that come up. So there really is not a typical day. It's just a lot packed in, and you're just trying to get through the important things that you need to do based on kind of the seasonal need and or other kind of internal or external grant deadlines and things like that.
Yeah, you kind of sound like you're sort of a jack of all trades in a way with a job like that.
Yeah, yes, that is true. This job is, you know how to do a little bit of everything, but you're an expert in nothing. Or a lot of times people come into this job being an expert in one thing, and then they kind of learn all of the other little things. It is a very generalist field. You have to have kind of like carpentry skills, and you have to have data management skills. You have to have plant identification skills is an absolute must. And then, good writing skills, and then just being comfortable working outside and knowing how to use a variety of tools. also how to maintain and take care of all the tools and equipment. So it's a lot of little things, and I'm not an expert in any one of them. In a way, it's kind of a niche field because that skill set is kind of unique. Like doing all of those different things in one job is not common, but any one of those things is not a particularly difficult skill to learn on its own, I guess.
Interesting. So if you don't mind, I'm going to go off script on our questions for just a second because, you know, some of the things you talked about with the ecological side, I think one of the things that our students would be particularly interested in is TIFT is such a unique place. I think most of our students have gone there and realized that, you know, it's got a lot of habitat value, which is maybe surprising for this preserve in the middle of the city, for, you know, for nesting birds, for waterfowl, for some pretty rare species. So how does your job relate to conservation for those species?
Oh, good question. Yeah, TIFT is a really unique place, and I continue to be surprised every day at like some of the rare things that are found here. But you know, it's a balancing act. You know, our preserve isn't like a national wildlife refuge that's huge and really, you know, relatively undisturbed and, you know, has a big staff. So it's like, you know, it's this balancing act because it's an urban nature preserve. So it has this really long land use history. And we could spend like 20 minutes talking about that, but you know, it's not a pristine place at all. It was an industrial shipping facility at one point in time, and then it was a city dump, and it had several other uses as well. And then it became this nature preserve with a focus on environmental education and, you know, access for birders essentially when it was established. So it's this balancing act between having a preserve that's here for people, so the environmental education for people to, you know, come and view wildlife, and then also just for people to come and enjoy, have a place to walk and get out and get into a natural space. So you're balancing that with the fact that it does provide this really unique habitat, and it does actually support a number of rare species, which is weird for what it is. So it's small, so it's trying to, you know, limit the uses that are going to, you know, kind of degrade the habitat or you know, cause stress to some of our kind of species targets, conservation targets, and then do the best we can with the local grant funding available to improve the habitats. Generally speaking, improve habitat and plant community diversity for a number of things, but also specifically, we have targeted a few different species in the past as well. I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry to throw you off.
No, that's okay. No, that's a good question. It's like that's the crux of the job, like balancing that, balancing the place and its qualities as habitat with the fact that it's a space that is intended to also be used by people.
So, can you share a little bit about the path you took to get to the job that you have now, kind of educational background and the experiences that you had along the way that prepared you to do what you're doing now?
Sure. Yeah, I had no idea what I was going to do when I was younger. I think I really liked being outside, and I grew up in kind of a rural suburb, like an exurb kind of Schenectady, New York, so in eastern New York State, and I spent a lot of time outside running and being out in the woods, and so I kind of like really appreciated that, but I never thought of that as something that it would just be related to my career. So I went to school and I started as an engineer, and I changed my major 3 times. And I still graduated in 4 years somehow. I'm not sure how that happened, but I I got, you know, there was a lot of overlapping classes, but in school, I took a few environmental studies classes and biology classes and realized I was really interested in it from the conservation perspective. I think not necessarily stewardship, but just seeing the degradation of habitat happening, like where I grew up, and both in terms of the quality, so deer being a big issue in really degrading forest regeneration, and really understanding that and the impact it had, and then also just development. Seeing these large tract of woods that I got to run around in when I was a kid just like disappearing, it was really sad. And so I really just wanted to get in the conservation field in general, and I liked the hands-on aspect of applied conservation, land stewardship, land management, that kind of thing. I kind of just like, I ended up getting a degree just in generally like in ecology. And then my first internship out of school in 2011 was with the Student Conservation Association, which is a great program that's almost the same as AmeriCorps, essentially. Set up like that, and there's a lot of different conservation opportunities. So I got to work in Southeast Alaska doing invasive plant management. So I was like kind of barely gotten into the field by the end of school, because I started out in a different program, and then all of a sudden I was in Alaska, like in charge of managing invasive plants in this whole town and national park for some, like in charge just because like they had 2 other biology staff. So I was like the invasive plant person, but didn't really know what I was doing at all. And so like that was a good exercise in just having to figure it out. And then from there, I really enjoyed that, both kind of the planning efforts and then actually going out in the field and getting to do the work. And then I did several other temporary jobs, seasonal jobs after that were stewardship, land management kind of jobs, and eventually got a permanent job with the Nature Conservancy in Northeast Pennsylvania, which I worked for like 3 years. I moved back to Buffalo because my current wife is here, and was very lucky to land this job here at Tiff Nature Preserve. So that's kind of my background. And I'll say it's like there's definitely not any one path to this type of job. And like I said, you mentioned being a jack of all trades kind of job, you can come from a lot of different places and end up here if this kind of ends up being what you're into. But you kind of have to like, you kind of develop this skill set in whatever part of it you're lacking, over time. But you really have to be passionate about the work, about wanting to protect and maintain the landscape. And that's kind of what drives me to do what I do every day.
Cool. So, Zach, what is the best part of your job, and what do you think is the worst part of your job?
All right. Well, I'll start with the worst. The worst part of my job is dealing with people that don't respect the preserve and the preserve rules. I'm not a park ranger. I don't have really any enforcement authority, but we don't have a ranger. We don't have a law enforcement capabilities, and the Buffalo police come and they won't get out of their cars in the parking lot. So we have to kind of try to get people to follow the rules as best as possible. More so than any other nature preserve or any other land I've worked on, Tift has a lot of rules. And being an urban nature preserve, it kind of needs a lot of rules. So yeah, telling people that they can't walk their dogs, telling people they can't fish in certain areas, telling people not to ride their bikes in the preserve, and then dealing with ATV trespass. That's the absolute worst one. It's not fun. Yeah, I don't want to be a law enforcement person. Not that there's anything wrong inherently being a law enforcement person, but that's just not what I want to do. So I would say that's the worst part of my job, but it's a very important part of my job. And then the best part of my job is getting to kind of reimagine what a degraded area or landscape may be able to turn into. So getting to do the planning and being like, hey, we should get this project going, and we can take this 5 acres of Phragmites and turned it into like a button bush shrub swamp or something. That is cool. And if you're really into natural history and stuff, and you spend a lot of time outdoors in other places, you know, you get to say, hey, I'm seeing the characteristics of this type of place here, but this is now covered in frag, so I think it would be appropriate to try and get this plant community going here. And that's, I don't know, that part of it's really cool and fun, trying to understand like what was there before or what was more appropriate and figuring out how to make it happen. So kind of like the restoration side. I'm not a restoration ecologist, but I have to like think that way to do my job.
Yeah, and you know, it's really impressive for any of the students watching just to get a small taste of that. If you've been over at Tift and seen where they Zach's put up the deer exclosure and done this whole restoration inside that, the difference between what it looks like inside the exclosure and outside is incredible. And Zach, I got to tell you, we were out there last summer. I was out with a few of my research students and they wanted to go walk around in the exclosure and check it out. And, you know, we were really struck by even the characteristics, like the humidity, everything felt different in there.
Mm-hmm.
Now that it's really fully grown up, it's such a different feel inside that exclosure than outside. And so I think that's a really cool, I guess, exhibit of what a restored Tift could look like.
Yeah, that exclosure is cool. You know, that was kind of a thing I thought would be a good idea, and I didn't know exactly how it would play out when we did it, but it seems to have worked out really well. There's still a lot of buckthorn in there to deal with. We had someone else do one of the herbicide treatments at the end of the year last year as maintenance on the buckthorn, and it was a wrong formulation of herbicide use, so none of it actually got controlled last year. So if you walk around and you see the buckthorn, there's more than there should be right now, but we're actually getting out there this week to deal with that. So but anyway, it is, you know, we did a lot of really dense planting. We seeded that area very thoroughly, and you know, it was 100% buckthorn before. Like there was buckthorn and then like bare soil under it essentially, and like almost no other plant species other than a little bit of stinging nettle and false nettle and some knotweed back there. So one of the cool things, just sorry to go on a tangent here, but I was out there on 4th of July because a deer was I got a report of a deer that had gotten into the exclosure, and it just happened to be 4th of July. So I was out there that night trying to, you know, corral the deer out of the fence, and I ended up being there a little after dark, and there was just this intense display of fireflies back there. And I really didn't know a lot about firefly habitat or anything, but I looked it up later, and they exist in like dense grasslands that are near water bodies for the most part, or you know, wet soils. And I know for certain that there were not any fireflies back there before in the buckthorn. So one of the species we planted, or actually a few of the species, were different wild rye. So Canada wild rye, and Virginia wild rye, riverbank wild rye. And those are great restoration grasses because they grow really quickly, and they're cool season grasses, and they can kind of give you a little early competition with some of the invasives. But you know, a lot of that is in there now, and just provided this totally new habitat that's just like all of a sudden the fireflies showed up, and it was just such a cool display. And as a bonus, when I was there on 4th of July, actually all the fireworks were going on over the Buffalo River. So it's like fireflies and fireworks. It was really crazy.
The monarchs have exploded back there too. I've been seeing so many monarchs back in that area now.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of milkweed back there, so that might be a reason why. I think it was summer of 2019 where it just seemed like we had, you know, anecdotally, just like a real explosion of adult monarchs out and about during the summer, like not just at Tift, but in Western New York in general. So I don't know what that's about, but it seems like it's a good thing. So
that seems like a good thing. So where do you see yourself in, you know, 5 years or so?
I don't know. That's a good question. You know, the one thing about this field is that there's some room for advancement depending on the organization, but in other organizations there's not. So I some people get into this field and they work like in this one role for life. So maybe that'll be me. I don't really know. I'm going to be at TIFF for the foreseeable future. But for larger organizations, either, larger land trusts or organizations like the Nature Conservancy is like the prime example. There are higher level conservation jobs, so that are a little bit more associated with higher level planning work, and less involved or no involvement in actual on the ground day-to-day implementation of the work. So I could see myself in a role like that. I could see myself as a consultant, or just doing this on my own on the side would be kind of fun. But I don't know. I just like doing this work, and if I can get by with the pay, then I will.
Yeah, the pay seems to be the recurring theme whenever we talk to somebody from a nonprofit. It's.
Yeah. I mean, the museum is good, and I work for the Buffalo Museum of Science. I don't think we said that, by the way, so it's kind of a unique situation there, who run and operate TIFF, and yeah, they're great. I mean, it's just, not-for-profit work in general. You're going to be making less than if you were to work for a for-profit company with the same skill set. That's just the way it goes. I will say in that regard, land management, land stewardship jobs, especially kind of the unique situation where you're like the steward of one property. Usually that's a land trust or some nature preserve run by a not-for-profit organization. Very few of those jobs around. So if you're thinking about getting into this field specifically, I think it's great. I would encourage you to, but be prepared for that. I mean, you might have to bounce around doing seasonal work for a while until you get a position that opens up. And you kind of really have to be willing to travel somewhere. I don't know of very many, if any, other jobs in Western New York that even are like my position. I know people that do similar work, but they're, for example, Western New York Land Conservancy has a stewardship, I forget his exact job title, but he's like the stewardship manager, but he's got 75 properties. So he's not really doing the same work as me. He's doing a lot of conservation easement monitoring, checking in on the properties and trying to get contractors out to the properties to deal with issues, and just bouncing around. So on paper, actually, the job probably looks pretty similar, but since I get to just focus on one place and he's at 75, it's a totally different job in practice. And actually my last job for the Nature Conservancy was similar. I had 10 preserves. So I was kind of doing some of the work I do now, but it was spread a little more thin, a lot less time for really in-depth planning, just kind of like a whack-a-mole type of thing. So, so the jobs, they're few and far between. You really have to be willing to move to do them, to different areas. But if it's what you really want to do, and you develop the skill set I kind of talked about earlier, it's definitely something you can get into. I think once you get the skill set, there's not going to be as many people out there with that skill set to compete with. So that there's kind of that balance there.
Yeah, good point. So, speaking of people who might be looking for opportunities to get that skill set, if you were hiring, say, a seasonal technician to work with you at TIFF, what kind of characteristics, qualities would you be looking for in a potential hire?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we do have seasonal technicians that work with us usually every year. And I'll tell you that not a single person has like all the things I talked about. It's just, to get out of college and be in that place and have all of those things, I mean, you're already doing pretty well if that's the case. But the most important things, I would say, you really have to have an interest in conservation. Like I would want someone that wants to be out there and wants to learn and is thinking about kind of the reasons for what we're doing, whether that's, even maintaining the trails. Like I'll think about what plants I'm cutting back sometimes because I'm like, I really want this Joe Pye weed to grow over here. I'm not going to just mow that down. Just like little things like that. So, you want someone that cares and is going to think about every aspect of their job and how it relates to the overall mission of, and balancing the human use and kind of the ecological management. So that interest is really important. And then I think next, the biggest thing is like creative problem solving because we are very lucky to have a maintenance building with a bunch of equipment and tools to use to do this work. But there's so many different things that come up to deal with. There's always and little time to do it. There's always just issues with getting stuff done on time and having, when something breaks, figuring it out. So like having someone who really can think out of the box and manage their time and being able to come up with a creative solution when a problem comes up, rather than being like, X broke, I need to like take it in somewhere to fix it before I can finish this job. Like someone that can work around that somehow and just get the job done anyway. Those are like the two qualities that are the most important. And like I said, a lot of the other things are technical skills that kind of come with experience. So any of them are a plus. Chainsaw experience, running and maintaining small engines is always good, because we use a lot of that kind of stuff in the summer. I can't wait for the day when we can use all electric battery operated equipment and we don't have to burn fossil fuels to do this work, but that's just the nature of it right now. Plant identification is really, really important for this job, but as far as a technician goes, it's not a requirement, and it's something that you can definitely get a lot of experience in working one of these jobs for sure, but that's definitely a plus if you have it. And then just familiarity and understanding of what nature preserves are and their purpose. I know that sounds kind of weird, but some people don't know that or understand that. So that's important too.
Cool. So, I guess just to end up, is there any other advice? I mean, you've already given, I think, us a ton of great advice, but is there any other advice that you have for any students who might be interested in pursuing a career path similar to yours?
Let me think there. Yeah, I did. Yeah, and sorry, I rambled on in a lot of those responses.
That's okay.
Yeah, I would say, reach out and volunteer at a bunch of different organizations, because they, a lot of organizations like ours are looking for volunteers, and that's the way to kind of get experience in a bunch of different places. If you were to volunteer for the Western Europe Land Conservancy, you'd get a very different experience than you get here, or volunteering for the Nature Conservancy or whatever, and depending on who you're working with too. So every person that works in this field is going to have a different background and a different way they got there and a different kind of focus. So volunteering with a lot of different organizations and kind of trying to wrap your head around some of this work is I think is a really good idea. And then when you're out there volunteering, just ask questions, be annoying and ask a lot of questions. I'm never annoyed by the questions. I like talking to people about that kind of stuff. Because if you don't ask questions when you're around people like that, and you're not going to get anything out of coming here and just planting. I shouldn't say that. You're not going to get a ton out of coming here and just helping me plant trees for a couple hours. Planting trees is important. It's something that I do as part of this job, but in terms of like getting real life job experience, that's not the most important thing in the world. But if you're working around like someone like me or someone else who's doing all this other stuff, and you have the opportunity to ask about why the work is being done or whatever, then I think that's pretty valuable, and it gives you a little bit of insight. So I would say do that, and just think about the skill set I talked about, and try and get experience in as many little aspects of that as you can, and try and just be really well-rounded and adaptable.
Yeah, adaptable is a good word, I think.
Yeah.
For a job like that. I just kind of think about like coming by that one day and you had the gator broke, you fixed it, right? That just seems like it's got to be a part of every day, that something's going to go wrong, something's going to break it, and you just got to know how to work around it. So
yeah, we needed that piece of equipment, and like I would have had to take it into the shop, and it would have been taking like 3 weeks. But instead we took the tie rod off and hammered it straight and put it back on and had it going, the next day. So
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of stuff like that.
Yeah, see, I think that for me, I find the adaptability and the creative problem solving part of jobs like that extremely appealing. So,
And that is what makes it fun.
watching,
It's just like, yeah,
yeah, anybody, the students watching who really want a job that involves a lot of different aspects of trying to have to just figure out how to do new and different things, new and different ways. It could be a really exciting career option.
that's very true. Yes, and that is what is a part of it that is very appealing to me. And I get easily distracted, and I think that's a good thing for this job, maybe because I am interested in figuring things out. But if you are just kind of want like one thing that you do all day and it's very consistent, and you kind of come into work at 8 and leave at 4 and you know exactly what you're doing, then it's probably not the job for you.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think that's a great point.
Oh, one other skill that I think I talked about, I'm sorry I'm dragging this on
Oh,
forever,
that's
that
okay.
I think like you really should highlight is writing skills. Like really good basic writing skills are really important, and people see my job and they think I'm just like outside running chainsaws and stuff, but I spent a lot of my time inside corresponding with people in grant writing and things like that, and being able to communicate really effectively and being concise, which I'm not being in this interview, uh, is really really important. So definitely work on that. Take classes in school to help you with that. Things are even different than when I was in school 10 years ago, but that I would definitely highlight that as an important skill for anything. So
Yeah, excellent. Good point. And especially with so many of these jobs being in the nonprofit world, I imagine grant writing is an extremely important part of being able to get anything done.
yeah, yes, yeah. Unfortunately, we have a great grant funder that we go to for a lot of the ecological work that is very supportive, but being able to write grants is good. And I mean, just writing a good resume and cover letter for a job is important. And I can't tell you how, like, oh, man, I don't want to be negative right now, how many really, really bad ones I see. So work on that, because that's what's going to get your foot in the door. If you can even land that somewhat related temporary job the first time, that's going to get your foot in the door. And a lot of that is like you comb through resumes and you see people with just like the most basic errors, and it's like, if they're going to make a basic error on this one document, they're giving me to judge them. I'm not going to consider them versus the person that put the time in and made it easy to read, made it very clear and concise. That stuff does really matter. You're not going to get the interview without having putting together a good application.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm glad you clarified a little, because I was going to ask you, since you said that, what makes a resume terrible?
What makes a resume terrible?
Okay, so you see a lot of terrible resumes. What makes a good resume
Yeah,
versus a terrible resume?
keep it like to 1 to 2 pages, so like front or back. Don't make it like 6 pages long. Don't put every job you've ever had on there. Don't put like completely unrelated skills on there. Don't put that you're in like some kind of like club in high school on there. And then like format it really well. Don't Make sure everything's consistent and it's formatted consistently throughout the whole thing. Make sure you don't have any spelling mistakes, and clearly state like your goal or objective for a career. If all your job experience is unrelated and you've been like a babysitter and you've worked at the supermarket and like whatever, like those are all good job experience. Like for your first job, you have to put some of those things on there to say, I've worked before and I know what it's like to work. That's good, but don't spend the entire time talking about it, and make sure you tie something in that's related to the field that you're applying to. So that should be your goal at the top or objective or whatever. And then it should also like have something like, I volunteered doing stewardship work at Tiff Nature Preserve or something like in there, and you should highlight that. Even if it was only like 5 times that you volunteered, like put that on there, like I was interested and I actually showed up and I did this thing. Yeah, I'm just like off the top of my head a bunch of things, but showing that you put the effort in and making it look good matters. Like, so.
That's great advice. Thank you. You know, I think no matter what field they're going into, I think every student's going to have to deal with writing a good resume and a good cover letter. So hearing those kinds
Yeah.
of tips and thoughts
Oh,
is really helpful.
yeah. And one last thing, write a different resume and cover letter for every single job you apply to. Every single one should be different. And it's a pain in the butt, but keep a master one there. Every time you apply, make a different folder, make a copy, and like tweak it so that all the different points like touch a little bit on the job that you want. It's easy just to like have one and then just kind of like push it out to a bunch of different jobs, but it's going to be much more effective if you kind of tailor each one to the job you're applying for.
Excellent advice. Lots of excellent advice. Thank you so much for giving us so much insight into your career field, a field I think a lot of our students just don't know a whole lot about, and giving us such great insights into, I guess, getting a job. And I think this is going to be really helpful for our students.
Yeah, I haven't been out there in the job world for that long, so I mean, take my advice with a grain of salt, but just some of my own observations.
You hire people, so you're still out in the job world.
That's true.
You're just on the other side of it now. Great. Well,
weird.
thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely, no problem at all. And if you would like to volunteer at TIFT, we're always looking for people to come and help us out. Right now, Mondays and Tuesdays, we're doing some work. Maybe Robin, you could give them my contact info, my email, and I can basically, if you email me, I'll push you over to our volunteer coordinator, and we'd love to have your help.
Excellent, thank you.
Shameless plug.
Yeah, no, that's great. I will post your email address for them on the course website. Awesome.
Cool.
Thank you.